Welcome to another episode of Jamming with Jason. Hey, today we've got, it might be a little bit of an emotional roller coaster for some of you that are listening, depending on, who you are, who you know, where you happen to be right now. But, if you've been listening to me for a while and you know that sometimes everybody's thinking something, but nobody's willing to say it. And so today is going to be one of those episodes where you're probably thinking this, other people are thinking these kinds of things. And honestly, folks, we just got to start talking about it, because until you start talking about it, until you start trying to work through it, things in your life will never change. So I'm excited to have my friend Sasja on with me today. And I will tell you, the fact that you're listening to this right now means there is something, at least one thing in this episode that you need to hear today. And in fact, you may not just need to hear it, but you may need to share this with other people that you know. And you'll find out more as we get into this episode. So whatever you do, listen to the entire episode, and let's roll that now. All right, Sasja.
Hey, Jason.
You are, we haven't known each other for very long, but you are one of my favorite people already.
Aw, I feel kind of the same about you.
Do you? Okay. Well, then I guess it's meant.
It's
meant to be, right? And I know it's I guess before we kind of dig in, because I think, both of us kind of have an idea of what we want to talk about today. But I always like to give people a little kind of a little thumbnail origin story, because for me, the people who are making the change in the world, there's usually a reason, right? There's a reason behind why we do what we do. Mm-hmm. And the people with the most passion that actually change the world are the people that have some of these kind of stories. And I know you're one of those people that has one of these stories. So just kind of introduce yourself briefly, let people know who you are, and kind of why you do what you do.
Well, there's nothing brief in the story about why I do what I do.
Well, we'll get more into the story later too, but
no. So in terms of me and who I am, I have my own business here in Canada, a consulting firm in leadership and culture development. So I work with leaders anytime from first line, frontline managers, new managers, all the way up to the C-suite, and particularly so at that senior level. And the work that I do, obviously, I want to help them be better leaders. But for me, the core piece of that is I want you to be a better human being. I want you to be a better version of yourself, first and foremost, because that's the type of person other people want to follow. So I'm really invested in that. I'm really passionate about that. And, and in terms of why I do it, which I know we'll get more into, but a lot of that stems, quite frankly, from I've seen everything from poor leadership to absolutely abysmal to toxic and destructive leadership. And I witnessed that. I've experienced it personally, obviously, in terms of some of the bosses I've had. I think most of us have an experience of a bad boss at some point. But even more so, I witnessed that because of what my father went through with a particularly toxic and bullying boss. And so I've seen firsthand what that kind of leadership, if you can call it that, and I don't really call it that anymore, but what that type of management and interaction can do to another human being.
Well, and I think that's why, again, that's one of the reasons why I love you so much, because it's about all of us becoming better human beings, right? Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times in business, because I've done the same thing, right? I've been in the corporate world for a long time. I've had some very toxic bosses, some that are just fabulous. Yeah. And I think so much of the time people feel like, or they get told that in order to be a good leader, you got to be strong. You got to almost be like an asshole in order to be a good leader. Yeah. And it's like, no, you don't. Right. Somebody I had on the podcast earlier, she said, leadership is caring for people. And I thought, oh my gosh, that is a great way to think about it. Yeah. And if you're doing a lot of these other activities, you're not really caring for people. It's almost like we've got to bring humanity back into the workplace.
100%.
It's missing right now. It's missing. Yeah. right?
Yeah, it is. It is. And there's a lot of pressure on leaders to deliver results. And that's great. I mean, I get it. That's kind of why businesses exist. But when we miss the whole part of caring for people, and as far as I'm concerned, in this day and age, if you don't care about people and their success, you have no business being in a leadership role. But the problem is a lot of people take on a leadership role without realizing that's what it entails. A lot of people are promoted into leadership positions because they excelled in what they were in. They might have been like the top salesperson, or they might have been like incredible at getting particular results. But then they get promoted. That doesn't mean they actually know anything about how to lead and manage other people. And then, so you take these people who were highly successful as individuals, and now you're making them responsible for bringing out the best in other human beings. Well, there's your first big disconnect.
Well, yeah, because a lot of times, like you said, you go from being an individual contributor who's very good at what you're doing, and it works for you.
Yeah.
But it usually doesn't work for everybody else.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's part of the problem too, is that people, they feel like, right, that because this made me successful, well, everybody else has to do it exactly the same way, because that's the only way to be successful.
Yeah.
But we're all different.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to, because, like I said, I know your dad's story, but other people don't. And I've had some same situations for me. I've had other family members, other people that I know that have gone through things that are similar. So let's just talk about it, because I think a lot of people are going to be able to relate to this. And one thing that I hope is people realize they're not alone.
Yeah.
So much of the time we all think that we're the only ones feeling this way. We're the only ones going through something like this. There must be something wrong with me.
Yeah.
But there's not. So kind of share a little bit about what happened. I'll share some, from my standpoint too. But one thing I want to make sure and get clear to people is when they can see that other people are going through some of the same things, they realize they're not alone.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and they're definitely not alone. And I'm almost sad to say, I'm always in a sense really sad to find out how many people go through the type of things that my dad went through. But that it emphasizes for me, it's even more important that we're talking about it and that we're doing something to change it. So, I mean, my dad was a heavy duty mechanic. He had done a number of different, blue collar type jobs in roofing and construction and that sort of thing, and then ended up, in being a mechanic. And that's not the easiest environment. It's usually a tough male dominated environment. So there's like some natural, I would say, cultural stuff in terms of, being the tough guy and, them talking smack to each other and, probably a lot of cursing and all that kind of stuff. That is normal. And I have no problem with cursing, by the way. But, like
having worked on lots of construction sites, I can validate exactly what you're talking about. Yes.
Of course, right? And there's a lot of, how they would talk to each other, which, in certain other environments would not be acceptable, but in that one is. However, and this was when my dad was around 58, 59 years old. He ended up getting there was a manager put in the management position. And this guy was like a real tough guy, apparently, quite dominating, authoritarian, frankly, just a real ass from how I remember my dad describing him. And my dad was the sort of person who typically was not afraid to speak up. I mean, he would tell you what he thought about you in a heartbeat. He would also speak up when other guys at the shop would not speak up against something. So he had no problem at first to disagree with this manager or to push back on him, etc. That really backfired on him in this instance, though, because this manager was quite a bully. And so my dad became then quite a natural target for this manager to go after, because as the one pushing back or speaking up, it was obviously this manager's intent to quelch that as fast as he could. So there was quite a bit of bullying that started to take place. A lot of And again, I'm not going to go into everything that my dad went through in that instance, but just a lot of things where my dad was starting to question, like, does this guy not think I can do the job? He thinks I'm not capable. He's getting like pulled off good jobs and put onto really crappy jobs, horrible shifts, like all this kind of stuff. And it got to the point where my dad was starting to have trouble sleeping because his stress was going up. And at first that was just, it's like it happens to all of us. We have a pretty stressful day at work, or, we have a stressful interaction. Things aren't going well with the boss. We don't sleep very well. But for my dad, it started becoming quite chronic. And what first was a few nights turned into weeks and then months. And then he was starting to actually have trouble functioning, because at that point, when you're not sleeping, you've got a lot of cortisol, in your system, adrenaline, et cetera. He was starting to shake, like physically shake, which made being a mechanic a bit of a dicey proposition. He also would have to drive long distances to go to sites and that sort of thing. So he ended up going off work for a period of time on short-term disability. But to be honest, that I think made things even worse, because then he was at home all the time. And my dad's whole kind of life mantra was, you work to provide for your family. And now all of a sudden he was stuck in this place of not working. So for him, no real sense of purpose or identity, or providing, really, even in the way that he would have thought of it. And so at that point, between the insomnia and I think just literally being at home, thinking about sleeping all the time, but not being able to sleep, he really spiraled into quite a depression. And after nearly a year of all of that, he ended up taking his own life. I had just, like, literally a week before, been accepted into graduate studies to study leadership. Mm-hmm. Because at that time I was new in a manager role myself. And it was really my first foray into leadership. And I don't know where life would have ended up, obviously, Jason. I can kind of guess, but it probably would have been something maybe a bit more, I don't know, superficial or light. But because of what happened to my dad at that exact timing, it became crystal clear for me that everything I had to do now in terms of studying leadership and going forward was to try and as much as possible, get rid of leaders like that in the workplace. Get rid of people who could take another human being and make them feel so insignificant, so unimportant, like not valued, like all of the way he made my dad feel like shit. Mm-hmm. That should just never happen in the workplace. And for me, it just became, I want to make sure that we don't have leaders like that. And if we do, then let's work with the other real leaders to help get rid of those people as quickly as possible, because they do so much damage.
Well, and I think that's the important thing is, like you said, that there's going to be people like that. Yeah. That end up in organizations, especially, I mean, if you end up having, if you work for a company with more than 100 people, there's going to be a few people like this.
Yeah.
But what's interesting and what you bring up, and because it reminds me of a story, one of my sisters had a very toxic manager. Mm. And I remember, this was, many years ago, but she was calling me and, because she knew kind of my background and what I'd been doing. And she's like, this is what's happening. This isn't right, is it? And it's like, well, no, first off, the person's not treating you like a human being, but I mean, it got to the point to where we were even talking about, potential legal action or other stuff that she could take, because my sister was getting singled out and really kind of, discriminated against and bullied in a way, where again, she was having some health issues with her husband. Mm-hmm. There were some other things that were going on. And what's interesting though, is because what you said was, I had kind of forgotten about the discussion I had with my sister. This was probably, I don't know, 8-9 years ago, something like that, that we were talking about this. And she just called me recently and said, hey, you remember that manager I was talking about? And I said, oh yeah. And she said, well, she just got early retired finally from that job. So my sister had left and moved on. But as we were talking about it, it's like that woman caused how many people to leave over time, right? And so, I mean, we were just starting to throw numbers out there, and it was a, smaller medical group. Well, not smaller, but kind of attached to a hospital. It's still a good sized staff and everything. But over the time, I mean, just quickly in my head as she was throwing numbers out, I'm like, this woman cost this company literally millions of dollars.
Yeah.
By having the turnover that was significantly higher than anywhere else in this practice.
Yeah.
In her group, right? And she was managing 20, 30 people, something like that. But when you have, turnover of 10 to 15 people a year, it's like, that's not normal,
No,
right?
it's not.
But
it's definitely not.
But it's kind of the two sides, right? It's like trying to help fix those leaders, but also it's like, what the fuck, folks? It's like,
yeah, wake up.
Why are you protecting someone who is toxic? Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, it's like the Catholic Church just moving pedophile priests to another parish so they can go, manipulate other kids somewhere else. It's like, it doesn't fix the problem. It only makes it worse when you ignore it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's incredible to me how often that behavior gets tolerated and justified. And yeah, it is a problem. And I get it. I mean, as much as I want those people to not be in organizations, I mean, heck, I'd love it if they weren't on the planet. That's not real life. But it's, it's what you and I are up to in terms of trying to make things better. And again, not only changing leaders, but, for me, it's also about working with people who might be in those situations so that they can find a way out of it. Whether it's, I need to stand up for myself more, I might need to pursue something as dramatic as legal action, et cetera. Or it's just, I need to make a choice to remove myself from this job because you know what? Your life is never worth that. It is never worth being in a job where you're treated like that.
Well, I don't know, because that's where I wanted to kind of go to, because I know, a lot of the people that are listening, they might be sitting there thinking, I totally get that. Maybe I feel like that. Hopefully if there's anybody who's out there that's not treating the people they work with like a human being, it's like, wake the fuck up, quit doing it. Stop it. Okay. But again, they're probably not even listening to this because they don't even think they have a problem.
Yeah, I know. That's the unfortunate truth.
That's
those are the people that are never listening to these podcasts.
So the people that are listening, right? They're probably the people like your dad, like my sister, like you and I, right? I mean, because like you said, both of us have even had times in our careers where we felt like this, right? I mean, and I had violent thoughts about one person not being on the planet anymore, right? And things that I would like to do to that person. It's like that is not who I am.
No.
But that person kind of drove me to that point by triggering me. So what are some things that people are listening can do for themselves, right? Like you said, I mean, there's kind of some of these big things, right? You already kind of mentioned three things of, do I stand up for myself?
Yeah.
Right. Do I just get the hell out of there? Right. But those are kind of some drastic things that I think most people are afraid of doing.
Yeah.
Because the reality is most people that work, especially in a corporate job, their healthcare, I know it's different for you guys in Canada, but for here, it's like you leave your job, you lose your healthcare, you lose all this kind of stuff. So the employers really have you kind of by the balls.
Yeah.
And so the pain has to be great for you to end up leaving. But what are some things people can start doing or start thinking, before they have to take some of these drastic measures, if you will?
Yeah. I mean, it's, and it varies obviously depending on the situation and the context. So let's go like let's call it the least extreme end. Let's say you've got a boss. There's some behaviors that you think are inappropriate. They're having a bad impact on you. Maybe they may be bullying, or there might be borderline bullying. In some cases, like if you've never spoken to your boss about it before, and although this is a super hard thing to do, I do advocate and I try to help coach people to at least attempt to have a conversation about the impact that your boss's behavior is having on you. Because sometimes, not always, but it definitely happens, there are bosses who genuinely do want to do the right thing, but they've got some bad behaviors. And, wherever they learned it along the way, et cetera. I've worked with some leaders who, frankly, when they had their assessments done, you're a bully, you're aggressive, you're demeaning, et cetera. Leader had no clue. They had no clue that's how they were actually showing up for people. And they were appalled and devastated by their own results. So on the one hand, it's entirely possible your boss doesn't actually understand the impact they're having on you. I've seen that happen. So, and in some cases, when they get that feedback and it really starts to sink in, they're willing to make the change. Now, that's a lovely ideal case scenario. It can certainly be beneficial to have outside support, like a coach or a human resources person in the organization to help. But in some cases, especially if you've never done it before and you don't know how it will be received, sometimes sharing like the impact this person is having on you and what you would appreciate different can actually shift things. Now let's go further down the line where maybe I've done that and nothing shifted, or I started getting pushback, defensiveness, or now I've become singled out, a target. So now I've actually made things worse, or the behavior is just getting worse. This is where I don't advocate now trying to confront the person because you're not safe in that scenario. And so it's always about like how much, you have to gauge for safety, right? Depends if people think they can, in fact, go to human resources. If that's an option for them, is there someone you can go to within the organization? If not within the organization, is there somebody you can reach out to outside of the organization? No matter what, and maybe I take this from my dad's own example, but the one thing I think is really important is to find somebody you can go and talk to about it. Because one of the big dangers, and I know for sure what happened with my dad was, because he was quite introverted. And I think, wanting to be, again, he was used to being, tough, invulnerable, et cetera, just felt like he couldn't talk about it, didn't talk about it with anyone. And I think that made him feel even more isolated. Like there was something, in fact, wrong with him. But I think, in fact, had he bothered to talk to even some of the other men, like on the team, et cetera, he would have found out he was not alone. He was not losing his mind, like any of these types of things. So I do think it's important in some way, shape, or form to reach out, like how your sister reached out to you, right? And then she at least had a thinking partner of, am I crazy? Or is this normal? So, and you could probably speak to that too. But I think that, like, first and foremost, you've got to reach out to somebody and double check like that reality of, am I making this up, or am I exaggerating this? Or is, in fact, there's something wrong with this behavior and how I'm being treated?
Well, and I think that's an really important step, right? Because we go crazy when we keep things in our head.
Yeah.
And again, I know there's a lot of reasons why people feel like they shouldn't reach out. Oh, Sasja's busy.
Yeah.
I don't want to bother her, right? Well, if somebody loves you, you're not a bother if you need help, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like I just had a recent extended family issue, and it's like, why didn't you reach out? I'm here. All you'd have to do is call. But it was one of those like, well, I know you're busy, blah, 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 right? But, so much of the time, I mean, we overthink anyway as human beings. And if you're just stuck in your own head and you're just repeating things over and over and over again, you're just reinforcing those things. And it's like you're in a pressure cooker. It's like my parents used to can a lot when I was younger. And so we'd have a pressure cooker, right? Yeah. And the pressure would heat up and then, the steam would get let off. And I think the problem is that, so many of us were under that pressure cooker, but we don't want to let the steam out.
Yeah.
And what happens if you don't let the steam out is it blows up, right?
100%.
That's why pressure cookers have a little pepcock or whatever they call those things on them, so that once the pressure gets to a certain point, it can be released. And like you said, a lot of times that's just reaching out and talking to somebody else to make sure, hey, I'm not crazy, am I? Because most of the time you're not going to be. Now, sometimes we might be wrong, and it's like, you're kind of being a victim and you're being a little too sensitive. But I think for most people, it's you're not crazy. And a lot of other people are going through the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is, it is unfortunate. And it is two sides of that. You're right, because sometimes it's how we interpret things. It's our own stuff. And we might happen to have a boss who's like pushing all the buttons on our stuff. And I've seen that happen too. I worked in human resources for many years and had a number of bullying and harassment complaints come in where, I mean, frankly, there was no validity to them. And to be honest, sometimes the actual bully was the person who had filed the complaint. So,
they were using it to get the other person in trouble. Yeah.
There's another expression, which is you spot it, you got it. Right. In terms of how we project onto other people as well, too. So those are very different scenarios, obviously. But back to, if you in fact are the one who is literally dealing with the brunt of this bad behavior or any type of bullying, I just don't think there's anything more important than reaching out for help and support. And I know that can be a very hard thing to do, asking for help. But again, like, to me, look at the alternative. Look at the alternative, which is to isolate yourself, and whether it gets, as serious as my dad's did in terms of taking your own life, even just the consequences alone, like you mentioned, your sister's health issues, et cetera. I see that happen for a lot of people. That level of prolonged stress, even if it's, whether it's insomnia or not, just that kind of stress, that's going to take a significant toll on our health and well-being. And then it impacts your other relationships, your family life, your home life. Like, again, like, the costs are significant versus, okay, it might be uncomfortable for me to ask for help, but it might be a whole lot better in the long run.
Well, and I think that's one of those things that a lot of times we don't think about because, again, the stress levels are up. Yeah. I usually kind of follow the American Psychology Association puts out like a survey every year. Mm-hmm. In the last couple of years, again, I mean, stuff has just been off the chart. Just sure. With, especially here in the U.S., all the different things that we're dealing with, from the little virus, and a whole bunch of other stuff, right? Political
there's a lot.
And social stuff that's been boiling up here, especially in the U.S. But it's one of those to where we're going to have a serious mental health crisis. We already have a serious mental health crisis.
Yeah.
People just don't realize it. And I see this showing up, a lot of the disease, a lot of the pain, a lot of the things that people are feeling in their body. It's because of stress, mm-hmm. right? It's like unless you had some sort of traumatic injury, like I fall and break my arm, how my arm hurts. Well, yeah, that's probably because of the trauma of the broken bone, right? Mm-hmm. But it's like, there's so many of these things like back pain, headaches, insomnia, stomach issues, right? Like feeling nauseous, feeling sick, and there's so much of the time that as people are, again, my wife, one of the jobs that she was in, it was, I started to look for patterns. And it was surprising how many times on Monday she wasn't feeling well and couldn't go into work.
Yep.
And if you look, Monday is probably one of the biggest absentee days. And, people at the corporations will say, well, it's because you're trying to take a long weekend. No, it's because people are freaking out.
Well, and it's also the day, I remember reading years ago, it is when the most heart attacks occur.
Most heart attacks.
Mm-hmm. Sunday nights and Monday mornings are when the majority of heart attacks occur. Like, and again, like, all of these things correlate to, you get people like, they're so stressed out, they don't want to go back to work. Right. And you get like this reprieve, maybe on a Friday afternoon and a Saturday. And this is assuming a normal work week, obviously, but there's legit reason to it. And I can totally believe, you would have seen a pattern of, somehow on Monday mornings, I don't feel well. Because this is, if that stress is always going to show up in the body. And that stress, again, at an elevated, in an elevated way and for a prolonged period of time, that's the root cause of almost every single major illness and disease.
Yep. Yeah, we think it's physical, but it usually starts from a mental perspective and then drops itself into the body. Right? Because one of my friends is she does massage therapy, mm-hmm. but she does some coaching and other stuff too. And so I remember the story that she told me. She said, this, one of her clients came in and said, oh, I've got this pain in the neck. So she did a little NLP trick on her. And she said, oh, who's the pain in your neck? And the lady goes, John, or whatever the guy's name was, like, without even realizing it. She just like said a name and she's like, what? Hold it. It's like, yeah. So that's probably causing, right, some of that literal pain that you're having in your neck, because subconsciously you're looking at it and you're saying, oh, John's a pain in the neck. John's a pain in the neck, right? And so you end up getting a pain in the neck as well.
Yeah.
So it's, but yeah. So, okay. So we talked about, look, first off, and again, we're going to weave through here. So I always love to do this where it's like, everybody wants the bullet points. We're giving you the bullet points, but you got to find them. You got to pull them out here, right? So I'll summarize a little bit for you, but you know what? I'm not responsible for your learning. You want to learn?
No, that's right.
All that you need is in here. You just got to pull it out, right? But
everyone will take something different.
Well, and everybody does take something different because they take what they need to at this time, right? So one thing, you could have a conversation with your boss, because like you said, I think there are a lot of people that don't realize what they're doing. It's not their intention to hurt other people or to say things that make people feel uncomfortable. That's not necessarily their intention, but until they're aware of it, they can't change it or do anything about it. And obviously, there's ways to learn how to do that, right? So that it's different. So you're not like, confronting in a bad way, but having, an authentic, genuine conversation with somebody, whether it's your boss or your partner, right? It's the same thing. And so you'd want to have it in a caring way, but bringing that awareness. And again, I'm a positive person. So I like to think that 80% of the people that are doing stuff don't realize they're doing it, and having a good communication is probably going to fix it. Right?
Yeah, I believe that's true too. And sometimes it doesn't always go well at first, because it can be hard for, someone in a leadership position to hear that, and be confronted with the fact that, oh, like, what? That's how it landed for you? But I believe most people, like you just said, genuinely have good intent, but they don't actually realize how that's hitting other people. And when confronted with that, they'll be willing to do something about it. Right now, whether or not they know enough how to change it is another question. But even still, sometimes that alone can really make a difference. And we could solve a lot of stuff, even just if we did that. And one of the things I work with leaders on a lot these days is helping them get better at asking for feedback, because most leaders don't even do that. They just assume that if people have a problem with them, that they'll tell them. But when I ask every person, like, how many of you give feedback to your boss, I'll get maybe 1 person out of 10 that raises their hand. Because how many people are willing to, it takes courage to give feedback to your boss, because they've got power over you. They've got authority. And depending how I think that's going to be received, but we also make up stories in our own head of like, oh, it's not safe, the boss isn't going to take it well, et cetera. And again, I don't believe that's true. I think it's true in a small percentage of cases. I think most bosses are willing to some degree to hear it. Right. But we all have to test that out for ourselves. But that's, again, when you're not safe and they truly won't take it well, that is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. Because then you actually need more of the help, and you just,
correct.
You got to start getting it out there. But it's because as we're sitting here talking about it too, it's like, I think that so much of the time we don't really know how to regulate our own emotions. There's that term emotional intelligence, and people throw it out there, and I don't know how many times I've taught on it. I mean, I coach people on how to do it, right, in my programs and things, but most of the time when people hear about emotional intelligence, they're like, oh yeah, my boss needs to be more emotionally intelligent. It's like, it's always about the boss. Oh yeah,
always
just doesn't get it, right? And it's like, whoa, right? I mean, if you go back to like, the 5 principles, right, that kind of came up with to begin with on it, it's like 4 of those are about you, right? Before you ever get to other people.
Absolutely.
And it makes me wonder too, and I don't know if this has been your experience, but a lot of times, when we're feeling those things. So again, I'm talking about it from the person kind of
Mm-hmm.
receiving, right? Is a lot of times when those triggers or those other things come, we just don't know how to deal with it either.
Yeah.
Right. We don't know how to process it on our own and work through it. And so as a result of that, we just keep stuffing it down, stuffing it
Yeah.
down, stuffing it down. Right. That's why lower back pain is stuffed down emotions.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's where it tends to settle in our torso. But have you seen that too? Is part of this maybe that we just don't understand how to really, regulate ourselves emotionally?
No, we don't. And in general, as a society, it's not widely taught, not widely understood. So, and again, where do most of us learn it? In our families. I know they teach more of it now at school. Like, I was actually impressed. I have an 8-year-old daughter, and she has a bigger emotional vocabulary, at 8 than a lot of adults I know. So I think it's getting better. But that being said, naming it is one thing, regulating it is a whole other thing. And the other problem isn't, like, especially in North America, what we're really taught is just numb it. Just, stressful day at work, go to happy hour with everyone, have a few drinks and it'll be okay, right? Like, go home and binge on Netflix. And we get indoctrinated with a lot of that of go shopping, work some more, drink some more, smoke a joint, like you name it, like just in some way numb out rather than actually deal with what it is that you're feeling and do something to work through it. And that's a big problem because, as you said, it's not like those feelings go away. Just because I have a few cocktails doesn't mean I'm no longer stressed, life is good, et cetera. Because when that buzz wears off, I am right back to where I was before. And in fact, I probably feel worse because, like the cycle just perpetuates itself.
No, it does. And I've seen that so much of the time too, of where, in one of the patterns that I want to have broken, right? And some of it is, like you said, it's learned behavior. Mm-hmm. So, again, this is all fictitious because my father was not an alcoholic. Okay. Yeah. never touched alcohol as far as I know. But, if I was taught, right, if I grow up in a house where my dad has a stressful job, he comes home, he gets drunk every night to numb, right, because of the stress that comes home from work. So he drinks. Maybe my mom doesn't like it that much. She might say something. He might get a little abusive. He might hit her, might hit me, right, as a kid, right? So these things might happen. Then he wakes up in the morning with a hangover. He goes back to work. He comes home. He does it again, right? And it starts to become this cycle, right? Yeah. And that's all that I've been taught. So again, if I see myself getting into stressful situations, I might turn to something like alcohol to try to numb. But the problem is, while we're numbing, we usually fuck up other things too, right? Like, you say something you didn't mean to say. You accidentally hit somebody that you never would have if you were in your right mind. Yeah. And so the problem is we're carrying home a lot of these things and then through these numbing behaviors. And it doesn't have to be substance, right? Like you said, it could be retail therapy, right? So I'm stressed out, so I go buy a bunch of stuff on my credit card and then I can't make my payments. And now we've got financial struggles, right? Yeah. But it's absolutely, it's the same thing. It just shows up in a different way. Yeah. But you just see these patterns over and over again. It's like, can we just break the patterns? Yeah. Right. I mean, and how do we do that? How do we kind of, again, like you and I, we're trying to help remove some of the stress at work and get people to regulate better so that it does it. But, for people that are in some of those numbing behaviors, what do we do? Right.
Yeah. Well, I think that, the first step is always awareness. And it's, are you even aware of how you're numbing? Because we all have different ways of doing it. Food, alcohol, drugs, shopping, even work, right? Some people just decide I'll just work more.
That's what I used to do. That's what I
I
used to do.
mean, there's a reason we have the term workaholic, right? Because there's a number of us that can take that to extremes. So you name it, but it's in what way are you trying to numb? Like that's the first question to ask. And I think we all do it in some particular way or ways, plural. It's just a matter of, can I identify why I'm doing this? Like, why am I in fact spending all this time binging on, whether it's Netflix or Amazon Prime or you name it, or why am I, actually buying like 5 bottles of wine a week or whatever it is? Like, if you can get really clear on why are you doing it, is it in fact to numb? Okay, well, if you identify that, now you've got to figure out, okay, so what's my strategy to find a much more constructive behavior? And that's the harder part, I think, because finding a constructive behavior means you got to also confront, why are you numbing in the first place? Right? So I'm not saying it's easy, but I am saying it's totally possible, because the one thing about patterns is we can all get ourselves caught in negative or unhelpful, unproductive patterns. But once you break the pattern and you can start to shift that, you can also create really positive and reinforcing patterns, right? You can decide, I'm just going to go for a walk after work instead of those 3 cocktails or whatever. I am going to call a friend and talk to someone. And maybe we have an agreement. I mean, there's a reason, like, we have the term venting, back to your pressure cooker analogy. One of the things about venting is that when we do it in a constructive way, is it helps release some of that pressure, because we generally feel better once we've talked about it. As long as that venting doesn't become, toxic in itself, where all we do is kind of bitch and moan and complain, and we never try to do anything good about it. But venting in itself is really helpful because it's a pressure release, right? So it's finding what would be a more productive pattern or a more helpful pattern for me that would in fact help me feel better, not just numb the bad feelings that I don't want to be feeling.
Yeah, because the problem is, like you said, the numbing, we never actually deal with it. We never feel it, and we just shove it down.
Yeah.
But the venting kind of allows you to process it and move through it, sometimes even quicker, right? Because as you're sitting there talking about it, it's, I mean, there's some real tools, right, that people can use. Like, you can scream into a pillow, right? Yes. I mean, it sounds, I know if you're listening, it probably sounds crazy, but I will tell you, like, if you're angry or mad and literally you like pick up the pillow and you just like start screaming into it, right? It's this visceral physical feeling, and you can actually feel some of that pressure leaving. Yeah. Right? Or a punching bag, or I mean, there's a lot of different things that people could do, and for each person it's going to be something different that's probably going to work better. But crying or screaming into a pillow for 5 minutes is probably a much more constructive behavior than downing a half a bottle of whiskey.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, especially like for myself, one of the things I've done, because back to anger, because that's a really good one. I think it's important for us to really express that anger. And it also needs, for me at least, it needs a bit of a container. So it doesn't become like, now all I feel is angry, because anger can also be, it can get, as we've seen, it can, get really dangerous too when it's unchecked. So I like to do anger on a timer. Like, even you're screaming in a pillow or et cetera, or I'll just allow myself to be as angry as I would need to be for like 1 minute, maybe 3 minutes. If I've like really got a lot of anger I need to work through. And in that time, I might vent to someone. It could be my husband. It could be, a friend, that kind of thing. Could just be sometimes to myself. I can just go on a rant. I can say and do whatever I want. Like, I have full carte blanche to just, that's that's French. We are in Canada, we speak French.
We speak French. Oui, oui.
Exactly. So, and I'll just go for it, right? And there's like swearing and cursing and yelling, etc. But when that timer goes off, like, I'm done. And now I'm going to go and move, because the next best thing I found with anger, because anger is literally that's where your biggest fight or flight kicks in. Physical movement becomes really important as a physical way to process anger. So for me, that means I'll get out for like a really quick run or a walk or just something that gets me moving. If I'm at home, it'll just be, I'm just going to run up and down the stairs a few times. Which can seem, in a sense, really strange, but to be honest with you, I feel much better when all that's done. Now I can like start to settle. Now I can much more logically and thoughtfully start to process, okay, so what's really going on? Because the anger is a cue, but the anger, is often there, and there's other stuff going on other than just anger. Because underneath anger is usually some kind of hurt, fear, sadness, disappointment, whatever. And the anger is like the first thing that shows up is the real signal. So I think it's important to move through it, but also contain it, so then I can get to the heart of what's really going on.
Well, I think that's a great point, and probably one of the biggest takeaways for today too, right? Is because, like you said, that so much of the time we end up kind of wallowing in our emotions. So it's easy if we're feeling fearful or anxious or depressed or angry, right? We can let that kind of expand out, to longer periods of time during the day that may end up taking it out too on other people as well. And so as you were talking about that, because I remember one of the other things I've learned was somebody talking about the 5 minutes of wallow, right? So you only do 1 to 3 minutes, which is even better than 5, but it's the same kind of thing where, this friend of mine, taught me this, and he would do this with one of his other friends, where it was like, this was his person to reach out to, like, oh man, it's a crappy day, right? And so it's like, okay, you got 5 minutes to wallow. That's it. I'm not listening to it anymore. So go. Right. And then when that little dinger goes off, then it's done. Right. Or, getting up, movement, like you said, is such a great way, because it also, not only does it help the chemicals in our body move, but it also, there's hemispherical shifts, right? That as we move. So like right now, you can't see, but my left leg is crossed over my right leg. So now I'm going to do a hemispherical shift, and I'm going to put the right leg over the left leg, right? So even a lot of times simple body movements like that kind of reset your brain a little bit, and it's almost like rebooting it.
Absolutely.
So that you start to kind of get out of whatever you happen to be in at that particular time.
I think that's important too, right? Like, as I just say with, when I'm working with people, every emotion has a posture, right? Like if I'm really, angry and indignant and righteous, like I'm not hunched over like this. I'm like, it's like full on, I'm angry, etc. Whereas when I'm sad and wallowing, I'm not usually going like this. I'm like, I'm curled up in a ball in some way, like there's a slouching, right? And so, and there's enough research around this as well too. And I think it was Amy Cuddy who initially did a TED talk on that, like with the power pose and that type of thing. But different emotions have different postures. And so when you also change your physical body, you're inevitably going to start shifting your internal experience too. Because if I stand like Superman, it's going to be really hard after a minute for me to still feel really sad and wallowing, etc. When I'm, standing like, I'm about to save the world.
Da, 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 Super Sasha, here we come.
Exactly. So, and people at first, they're always like, okay, that's weird. This lady's like, woohoo. But try it. And then, but the stuff works, right? We try to convince ourselves that we're just intellectual beings, but we're not. We're emotional beings with a physical body, and all of those things have to come together in some way, shape, or form. So yes, you can shift your experience and your patterns from the inside out, but you can also shift a lot of things from the outside in.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you brought that up too, because I've said that to people so much of the time. They still don't believe me, but it's scientifically proven. 90%, 95% of everything you do is emotionally based. No matter how much we try to think that we're cognitive and we're rational, logical people, 95% of everything we do is emotional. And I think it's, another one that I've heard of too. And it just popped into my head again, because I remembered one of my professors when I was doing my undergrad. He worked in New York in marketing for a long time. And so he knew the guy that did the voiceovers for Tony the Tiger.
Okay.
The Frosted Flakes.
Yeah.
So in the middle of meetings, this guy would just like break out into Tony the Tiger voice, right? And it just kind of breaks up the meeting, would do some different things. But I've even heard of, I haven't practiced it as much, but it just brings again to my awareness of something to do where, just like your posturing, right?
Yeah.
If you're angry, you're going to be, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But our voice, even the
Yeah.
same way, right? So it's like, if I'm really mad at you, I could use my voice and start yelling at you, or I could go, Sasja, I am so angry at you right now. I cannot believe what you're doing. If you use some other
Yeah.
silly voice, I think that would even kind of help you, just
So
like you
true.
said, running up or down the stairs, or doing some of the other stuff. Use a voice maybe that's different than what that emotion would normally, be.
It's so
And
great.
that'll
Yeah.
also probably help shift you quicker too. So
Yeah. I think so too. And sometimes, boy, we need to shift ourselves out of that. And, certainly for me, there are many cases where it's like, oh yeah, I just need to learn to laugh at myself a little bit more because I'm taking this, and this could be that person's behavior or, this event or whatever. I'm taking it way too personally and way too seriously.
yeah. No, and it yeah, reminds me, there's little sayings like laughter is the best medicine.
Mm,
It's there for a reason, folks,
yeah,
right?
it sure helps.
Because a lot of times I think, again, if there's different emotional scale kind of diagrams, right? That because literally there's like usually different literally energy frequencies that emit from us when we are in certain emotions.
Yeah.
And so for the most part, a lot of the things that we would consider bad, but they're not necessarily bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's all right to feel sad
Yeah.
certain times, because you're supposed to feel sad sometimes. You just don't want to stay stuck in
Yeah.
being sad, right?
Yeah.
But what's the interesting thing is, most of those that we would consider to be the more negative things, anger, depression, fear, anxiety, those tend to have lower frequencies, where,
Mm-hmm.
the having fun, the joy, the laughter, the happiness, those kind of things tend to have a higher frequency. And so, again, even with something like laughing, right? Right? That has a totally different kind of frequency and feel to it than if
Yeah.
I'm just being very serious to you right now.
Of course.
And so, yeah, I love that. The more that we can laugh, I'm sure the more that helps, because I take myself too seriously.
Yeah. I think we all do in some way, shape, or form, right? Because we make everything personal. And most of what happens in life is not personal. Right. But we can make the weather personal. Oh, like, oh, the weather's crap. And, it's ruining my day. Like somehow the weather was out to get you. The traffic is personal, right? It's making me late. It's, this person's behavior, especially with other people. Like, and again, this, circling back to where we started, and with leaders, most of the time we think a leader's doing this stuff to us on purpose. 99% of the time, that leader has no clue. They haven't thought about how it's impacting you personally. They're just thinking about what they need to get done and what's happening in their world and how they're being impacted by their boss and so on, right? So yeah, we have a really bad habit of making ourselves the victim in our own stories.
Well, isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
That's a phrase that I've started saying to myself more, right? When it's a time when we feel like, oh fuck, kind of a time, instead of just going, well, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Even just saying it now, right, makes me giggle a little bit.
Totally.
But it's, like you said, and it's not so much of the time we take things personally that we shouldn't. We stay stuck in them longer than we need to.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have to.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the fine dance with emotional intelligence, right? It's really important to feel, and it's important to work through those emotions, name them for what they are, feel them like fully, and then you got to move on and do something about it. And so that's the, where I see people get stuck is they don't actually go into the feeling of them, etc. And or they go into it and then they, to your point, they get stuck there. I wallow forever. Like I go on and I vent endlessly. And it's, you know, and I've had clients like that too, that I've coached, who just like at session after session would want to vent and vent and vent. And I get to the point where I'm like, okay, enough. I get all of that. And what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. How long are you going to keep wallowing?
Yeah. Cause we could have this conversation for like a year or 10, but that's not in your best interest. And it definitely isn't in mine. So,
Unless they're paying you a lot more, right?
yeah, right. And it's, you know, and I don't think most of us really want to stay stuck there. But to be honest, it's easy to stay stuck there too, because then I don't have to take responsibility for changing anything.
Yeah. Well, because that goes back to what you were talking about before of sometimes we just don't want to confront ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to have the courage to confront ourselves and see that a lot of times we're the one that's responsible for it.
Yeah.
Like I was kind of typing up some different like little sayings and stuff, to share with people. And that was one of them that it's, I like to use the analogy of your hand, right? And it's like,
mm-hmm.
we always want to point our finger at somebody.
Yeah.
And there's one towards you, but there's three to me.
Yeah. Coming back.
Yeah, there's three coming back. And just how much of the time it is that and I've seen this with the executives that I work with, right? Is that it's like, I don't know how many times I've had the conversation where they're bitching about some employee, they're having this problem with this employee, blah, 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 right? And at the end of the day, it's like, your employee isn't the one with the problem. You're the one with the problem. It's like, it's like you haven't done something right. So much of the time, the things that happen to us, they're our responsibility.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if I don't treat you kindly and you don't like me, well, whose fault is that?
Yeah.
It's mine. Right.
Yeah.
Because ultimately that responsibility comes back to me. We can blame other people all day, but your life ain't going to change until you change.
Yeah.
Right. And as you change, then everything else around you changes as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, like one of the big things I'm always reminding people of, myself included, because I still need the reminder, we are always at choice. Like there's always a choice, right? And, and even to your point about, in the US and, people get, stuck in their jobs because of, their healthcare can get taken away, et cetera. I mean, I get it. Those are really hard choices to make. I mean, one of the reasons my dad stayed in his job, and despite what he was going through, like he wasn't going to quit, wasn't going to give up, because he was so locked in on this idea of my pension, but I need my pension. He didn't even live long enough to see his pension. Right. So he made a choice in that moment to stay and to continue staying. But I mean, obviously at a very significant cost. And I'm never going to tell anyone what to choose, but I am going to continue to remind people there's always a choice, and you have to consider, what are the consequences of you potentially staying in a job or staying in a bad situation? What are the consequences if you decide to go? And can you deal with those consequences? But in some way, shape, or form, we always have a choice.
Yeah, we always have a choice, but it's good too that you bring up the consequences. There are consequences for every choice.
Yeah.
Right. And so again, we just have to be willing to do that. But the nice thing about choice too is if you make a choice you don't like, you get to make a new one.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes you have to clean up some stuff, from the consequences of a previous choice, but we always have a choice.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've made definite choices around, leaving jobs, leaving relationships. I've lost a lot of money in both of those cases, relationships and jobs. It's like, there goes all that money out the window. But at the end of the day, was I prepared to deal? I mean, maybe I wasn't fully prepared sometimes at the time to deal with those consequences, but I still figured it out and made my way through it. And it was still the better choice in terms of my sanity, my well-being, my happiness, my fulfillment. That for me was more important than, do I want to stay in this job that's making me miserable, or this relationship that is, really unfulfilling, dysfunctional, whatever it is.
Well, and I think that's where, that's a great way to kind of end and wrap up here a little bit too, is, that's the point, right? It's so much of the time we want to make decisions based on money. We want to make decisions based on short-term comfort. But at the end of the day, you know, it's like, how much is your mental well-being worth? How much is your physical well-being worth? Right? Is it worth the money? Is it worth the stress? Is it worth the, you know, hospital bills, the doctor bills, the pain, the whatever else that comes along with it? Would you rather have that, or maybe have an uncomfortable discussion with your boss? Which one would you rather have? It's gonna, you're either gonna have a short-term uncomfortable discussion that hopefully doesn't lead you down the path to all that other pain, or if you don't, I guarantee you're going to be at that pain, right? Because that's where it ends, unless we change, unless we do something different. So which one do you actually value more? Because like you said, it's there's a lot of things that are worth a lot more than money and short-term discomfort.
Amen to that.
and I hear you on that. All right. Well, any last things that you'd like to leave people with here, you know, as well, that like I said, they've gotten a lot of stuff from this already. They can go back, they can rewind, they can listen again, take notes. But anything else that you think?
That last point we ended on, you know, again, remembering always that you're at choice. So even when you're in a tough situation, it doesn't always have to be like, do I stay or do I go? Sometimes even within an organization, is there a way you can, if it really isn't going to work out with a coworker or a boss, is there a way you can move to a different team or a different department, et cetera? Like, still maintain the job, but maybe you try and get a new job for yourself within the same company or organization. Like, it's getting really creative about what are all my possible choices, including some that may not seem so obvious at first. And that's why I also think talking to other people and helping brainstorm some of those choices can be really helpful, because too often we have a very narrow view of what our own limited options are. And I think we can get a lot more creative with what's available to us.
Because life is full of endless possibility, because that's the other thing, like you said, with choice. So much of the time we think a choice is either A or B. But there's so many other choices besides A and B. And sometimes, like you said, it's we go into something thinking we only have one choice, but there might be some other options if you explore those possibilities as well.
Big time. Like, I had a client who did really struggle with her manager, and really didn't want to leave the job, did not want to leave the organization, but so then was able to strategize, getting herself involved in a lot more projects that did not have her manager's involvement. So her contact with her boss is now much more limited. It's only like 10% of the work time, whereas before it used to be like closer to 90% of the time. So she was just able to get really creative with making that shift. Can't avoid the boss entirely, but it's such a small part of her work experience now, and she's infinitely happier as a result.
Because she's able to interact more with the people on those other teams instead of directly with her boss.
So you never know. Like, there's, you know, you never know, but there's always a way to figure something out. That's what I believe.
Well, there is. And so, you know, if anybody listening feels like you're at the end of your rope, there's other possibilities. Reach out to somebody. There's other possibilities that you're probably not even thinking about. And that's, to me, one of the beautiful things of life is some of the best things that have ever happened to me were things that I never would have expected. But they just come out of the woodwork. Right.
I would say the same.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
So
how time with you.
How's the best way for people to reach out to you and connect with you if they want to as well?
Best way is probably on LinkedIn. That's where I tend to be the most active, just because of the type of work I do with organizations. So they can find me on LinkedIn. My website, which is dynamicachievement.com. You'll find more about the work we do there. And those are probably the two best places. You find me there, you're going to find me everywhere else.
Well, and you're one of those people too, where just type her name into Google.
It's true. Just Google me, you'll find me.
I'm like that way. People are like, well, how do I get a hold of you? I'm like, have you ever heard of Google? Just type my name in Google and of the top 10 or 20, I'm going to be like half of them. The other one is, there's two MDs with my same name, but one of them, you'll know, you'll find me.
Yeah.
You'll find
There's
her.
literally nobody else with my name, so I'm very easy to Google.
Easy to Google. Well, thank you, my friend. You helped a lot of people. Helped me too, because even me just listening and going through this, you brought some other stuff to my awareness again too, that I thank you for.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, and keep going out and doing that good work and helping everybody, so that we can have a kinder, gentler workplace with better leaders and more people that can emotionally regulate themselves and those around them as well. So thank you.